Welcome to Inside the Indians, your source for insider information on the Tribe. Stay with us as we bring you the latest about the players, managers, and people behind the scenes at Victory Field. Now here's your host, the longtime broadcast voice of the Indians, Howard Kellman.
Hi everybody, and welcome to Inside the Indians. On today's show, we'll talk to Gary Green, a former Indian shortstop and the Pittsburgh Pirates infield coordinator. We'll also talk to Indians head athletic trainer Dru Scott and to Cheyne Reiter, who is the Indianapolis Indians baseball communications manager. Back with Gary Green on the home of the Indians, WHMB TV 40. Former Indianapolis Indians player and the Pittsburgh Pirates minor league infield coordinator is our next guest on Inside the Indians. Gary, always great to see you. Please tell us about your responsibilities with the Pirates.
Well, it's changed a little bit this year, Howard. When I come into town, when I come to Indianapolis this year, it's going to be different than it's been in the past. I'm going to stay here for probably 7 to 10 days. When I go down to Bradenton, it's going to be the same thing, 7 to 10 days. And when I go to the other affiliates, it's going to be a little bit less. So we're really going to spend some time focusing on our core players here at this level. As you know, a number of these guys are on the verge of being our next big league players. And we have a guy down in Florida who we think has a chance as well. So it's changed a little bit, but very similar role, just more time in certain spots.
What are some of the things you try to get across to the young infielders?
Well, I think at this level, these guys are getting close, so it's really basically finishing school for these guys. The biggest thing is helping them with situations, making sure they're in the right spot without the ball. They communicate with each other, just the finer points of the game, because they're, again, it's finishing school for these guys.
I've heard the expression, you field the ground ball with your feet. Tell us what people mean by that.
Well, I think what people mean, I can only tell you what I think it means, Howard. I think what it means for me is timing and rhythm. So right-left catch timing as opposed to right-left catch timing. So when the left foot hits the ground, you'd like to see the ball be in the glove. That helps the body flow, and that's the timing and rhythm for me.
Now, when you get a kid and you work with the kids who are signed after the June draft out of high school, out of college, out of Latin America, what are some of the things you try to get across to the young kids?
Well, I think it's basically you want to watch them for a while and see what they bring to the table. Obviously, they have the skill, they wouldn't have been able to be signed. But the biggest thing for me is to watch them for a while, and then once you see what you think that they need, then it's to introduce them to the fundamentals of the game, mainly fielding.
Tell us about those fundamentals.
Well, I think we have 6 F's, Howard. I don't know if we've talked about it in the past or not, but basically it's feet, field, funnel, footwork, fire, and follow. And that's the sequencing in which it happens when you field a ground ball. So we try and introduce them to those. And then we watch them, we talk to them about it, and the biggest thing is really watching them play and really see what they need.
Now, how much is ability? You have to have certain natural ability, but then again, guys can improve too.
I think guys can. If they're students of the game, they watch the game, they pay attention to the situations, because that's all the game is a game of situations. That can really speed their progress up, as opposed to having to go through it themselves. They can learn from other people's mistakes or when other people do something well.
I've heard of situations at first base and third base where guys weren't that good, but they worked and they worked at it at those positions and they really improved themselves. George Brett was an example of that.
No question. If you're diligent and you go out there and you have intent on what you're trying to do every day to get ready for the game in your terms of your preparation, you're going to get better. You can't help but get better.
What about shortstop?
Well, I mean, I think it's the same thing. It's all about the intent and what you're trying to do. Focus is a big thing, obviously, and that's the biggest thing probably for our guys at the AAA level, is to make sure that they learn how to play every single pitch, every single night. It's hard to do, but it's certainly a separator.
That's something you told me that Larry Bowa taught you.
He did. He sure did. That was the finishing school for me, was learning how to play every pitch every night, regardless of the score, whether you're winning or losing by 1 run or 10 runs. Because at the end of the day, when you look at the number of errors you have, that's all they see. They don't care when you made them. They just know that that was the number. So the way you minimize those type of things is through focus and concentration.
When you look at shortstop as opposed to the other infield positions, doesn't it demand a certain kind of fluidity or smoothness to it that you might not necessarily have at some of the other positions?
I think it does, because the angles that you take are different than what you would take at second base. They're different that you would take at third base. You have more room to move around and flow at shortstop than you do at some of the other positions.
And speaking of shortstop, Cole Tucker is a young man full of enthusiasm, great energy level, and it's wonderful to have a shortstop like that.
No question. He reminds me a lot of Jeter in terms of he's got leadership qualities. He's enthusiastic. He's a student of the game. He pays attention. He's the first one to acknowledge and congratulate somebody when they do something well. He's a baseball rat, man. He loves this game. And we see nothing but good things and bright things in his future.
Tell us about his partner on the left side, Brian Hayes, the third baseman.
Well, it's funny. We're fortunate to have two of them. Those are two guys that could be core players for us for a long time. So you people in Indianapolis should really enjoy watching these two for this year at least.
Did you ever play against Brian's dad, Charlie?
I played against Charlie a long time ago in AAA, so Brian's going to be a better player than Charlie, and Charlie was pretty good.
Well, Charlie told me, I met him in Allentown a couple of years ago, he said Brian has better makeup than I had. And Charlie played 14 years in the big leagues, but he said Brian handles the ups and downs on a more even keel than I did.
He certainly seems to. That's the one thing I've noticed about Brian since we've had him in our system the last 4 or 5 years. He never gets too high and he never gets too low. You don't know if he's 3 for 3 or 0 for 15.
It's a wonderful quality to have.
It's a great quality, especially in this game. You know, all the ups and downs in this game, especially with the bat.
Tell us about first baseman Will Craig.
Will Craig, another one who really came on last year in AA Altoona, ended up with 20 home runs and over 100 RBIs. But to me, more impressive than that was him paying attention to the details of first base, situations again, his setup position, just becoming more aware of the details of what it takes to play that position and the demands that it takes to play that position. So big strides from him out of last year. So nothing but positive stuff to say about Will as well.
What do you feel, and give us your thoughts on this Victory Field infield?
Oh, as we've talked about in the past, Howard, it's the best. I don't know if there's a better infield in baseball than the field here in Indianapolis.
What does that do for you as an infielder? What's that do to your mindset?
Well, I think it certainly makes it a lot easier for you because you know where the ball is going to hop, you know where the bounces are going to be. Very seldom do you ever get a bad hop on this field, so it certainly makes the game a little bit easier for you.
It's great if you have confidence as opposed to playing on some fields that aren't as good, and you played shortstop for the Indianapolis Indians in 1993 at the old ballpark, Busch Stadium.
Well, that field was certainly not as good as this field, Howard. It was a challenge playing over there for sure. Our guys are really fortunate to be able to play on this field.
Gary, I've interviewed you on radio many, many times. This is the first time on our TV show. Thank you so much.
Howard, always a pleasure. Good to see you.
That's Gary Green on the home of the Indians, WHMB TV 40. Guest on Inside the Indians is a man who means so much to the Indianapolis Indians and to the Pittsburgh Pirates, and that's Dru Scott, the Indianapolis Indians head athletic trainer. And Dru, great to have you aboard. Tell us about your responsibilities.
Day in and day out, I'm responsible for the health of each player on the team and even the staff. Over the course of a season, there's a lot of things that happen over the course of 140 games. So myself and the strength coach, Alan Burr, we work together to make sure that guys are healthy, make sure they're staying on the field, make sure that strength is staying up where it needs to be, conditioning's in line, and that pitchers' shoulders are where they need to be, and position players making sure those legs are healthy for the 140-game season.
What do you guys try to do to keep them healthy?
Each day is different. Depending on how they feel, how they come in each day. may look like certain movement patterns. We may try to warm them up a certain way, or if they've played multiple games in a row, it's trying to get these recovery techniques, hopping in the tubs, some things like that, just to make sure those legs are fresh and ready to go.
What's the overall difference in approach you take with a position player as opposed to a pitcher?
Pitching, we try to make sure those shoulders and elbows are healthy, making sure they're stretched out each day. Starters are very specific. They're on a nice 5-day routine, so they're kind of lined up. The relievers, they're not so much scattered per se, but we got to make sure that they're checked in on too. And the position players, we're more worried about how their legs are holding up, making sure they're under them, they feel strong, and they're not heavy. Sometimes you play multiple games in a row at different positions, those legs can tend to get heavy.
Okay, what's the approach as far as weightlifting and the attitude the Pirates have toward that?
We put a lot of stock in it. We want our players to be strong is healthy. So that makes it a big part of what we do. It's something that we have to monitor throughout the season as well. As the season goes on, it becomes less of a priority, and we want to make sure that they just maintain that strength in order to hold them up for that last final run.
How about stretching? How important is that?
I mean, it's very important. Again, we do a lot with that with our pitchers for that upper body, that shoulder, elbow, making sure it's mobile and ready to go. Some guys, it's very individualized. Some guys like it, some guys don't. So we just make sure that we're on top of that strength with them as well in the shoulder, elbow.
Doing squats in the gym is an exercise that can be very beneficial. I'd like you to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, some would say it's the best exercise in the world. Some guys, we just make sure that we're not going to load up a guy on squat if that pattern isn't, going to be beneficial to him. Some guys may prefer to deadlift. I mean, everything has to be individualized with what we do. If they can't perform the squat very efficiently, we aren't going to have them do that. That's not going to put them in the most optimal position to succeed.
You're talking about you must have proper form.
Absolutely.
Okay, here's a question about squatting. Now, a catcher, the nature of your job, you're constantly squatting. Yeah. Do you want your catchers to do squats in the gym too, or do you say no?
It just depends. We want to make sure that those hips have good mobility in them. We want to make sure those hip flexors are stretched out and make sure everything on the backside is strong. So it doesn't necessarily mean they need to squat. We just need to make sure those hips are mobile.
This game is all about confidence because it's a hard game to play. And I think being in shape, going to the gym, can often help a player's confidence.
Absolutely. You look good, play good is what they always say, and you can kind of build that confidence in the gym. So we try to push it as much as possible, and, even for the staff, making sure they're healthy, making sure they're getting in there and getting active, and that's going to lead to holding them up throughout the whole season.
Well, you work out and you keep yourself in terrific shape, and I think it's good when a player walks into the training room to see a trainer in great shape.
Yeah, I do what I can. I'm not getting any younger out there, so it's the only thing I have anymore. Got to make sure I can lift some weights.
Well, you're an Indiana boy. Tell us about your background.
I grew up in Mulberry, Indiana. Some people confuse it for Mayberry, but there's like 1,200 people there. Moved to Lafayette. I went to Manchester College, just kind of stuck around the state. My wife and I live in Fort Wayne right now. We used to live in Carmel. So we're Indiana bred, so it's nice to call this home.
And tell us how you became the trainer here and your athletic background.
Back in 2009, I started in GCL with the Pirates. I actually worked at West Lafayette High School and got hired with the Pirates from there, and just worked my way up through the ranks. And 2017 was my first season in AAA, and it was nice to be at home and be in Indianapolis because I've always loved this city. I've always loved downtown. Grew up a Pacers fan, loved Reggie Miller. Grew up a huge Peyton Manning fan. So being here in this city it means a lot.
What's it like being a baseball trainer as opposed to a trainer for other sports?
Not every other sport plays every day like we do. So there's a lot of variables that can happen each day, and even some that we can't control, like rain. So it just depends on what it looks like each day. But yeah, we play every day, so we have to be ready to go each and every day.
And is the nature working with a football or a basketball player much different than working with a baseball player?
I don't think it is. I mean, they all have the same mentality. They want to be the best in the world. They want to be the best at every position and put themselves in the best position possible to be the best that they can be. So I don't think mentality, there's a lot of difference between each sport.
You have a great relationship with Brian Esposito, the manager of the Indians. Tell us about that.
Yeah, I mean, we have to. He has to know everything that goes on in the training room. If we're running guys out there, he has to know the health of this club. And so I kind of hang out in his office a little bit more than probably everybody else. So he needs to know what I know, and he doesn't know anything that I don't, and vice versa. So it's a good working relationship, and it's been that way since last year. So he puts a lot of stock into what I have to bring to the table as well as Alan.
Drew, we appreciate all the great work you do. Thank you
absolutely.
So much.
Thank you very much.
That's Dru Scott, the Indianapolis Indians head athletic trainer on the home of the Indians, WHMB TV 40. Cheyne Reiter, our next guest on Inside the Indians. He is the Indianapolis Indians baseball communications manager. That is a mighty impressive title. Now you have to tell us about your responsibilities.
It's a pretty obvious one when you look at it. I work for a baseball team, and I get to handle communications and manage a couple people up in the front office while I do it. This is my third season, Howard, as you know. I'm not closing in on you in any regard in terms of longevity. But I've enjoyed my time here very much. The Indianapolis Indians have been a great landing spot for me. I'm from the state of Iowa originally. My goal was always to work as high as I could in baseball, and I find myself here in AAA in just a short 5 or 6 hour drive from home. In regards to my responsibilities, a lot of the work that make you sound good on air is my pregame work.
I see.
Some of those notes and factoids that you pull up and people that listen think, wow, where did Howard get that? Sometimes it comes from the game notes. Now, a lot of times you're doing your own research as well, as you know, leading up to a first pitch. But we try and feed you guys as much information as possible. It's not just you and Kappas that get to dissect that information. It's visiting broadcasters, it's media that come out here on a nightly basis to cover the Indians. And then really just other stat packs, things that get disseminated down in the clubhouse that coaching staffs can use and utilize for their game preparation, lineups, roster sheets, you name it. It's just a lot of stuff that gets printed. Howard, I kill a lot of trees. I used to landscape though, so I feel like I've planted just as many as I've probably cut down.
You mentioned being from Iowa. Mitch Keller, the #1 prospect in the Pirates system from Cedar Rapids. Did you have a chance to talk to him at all?
I did, and Mitch and I have one very important thing in common, and that's we're both big Iowa Hawkeyes fans. Mitch was actually committed to play college baseball at the University of North Carolina before signing with the Pirates back in 2014, but he's a diehard Hawks fan, and that's where I attended school. I transferred there midway through my sophomore year after playing some JUCO soccer and baseball and hung it up. I knew I wasn't going to be playing out here, so I figured, how can I work my way into a front office and stick in sports and specifically baseball? But Mitch and I, we have that Iowa connection. Cedar Rapids is only about 45 minutes away from where I grew up. I'm familiar with the high school that he went to. I graduated 4 or 5 years ahead of Mitch, but we have that Iowa bond, and that's something that was cool to see him make his debut the other night in Cincinnati, and he's going to have a bright future ahead of him.
Let's talk about the fact that you also worked for another AAA team before you came here. Tell us about that.
I did. In 2015 and 2016, I was actually in a completely different time zone. I found myself on the West Coast, not on the coast, but Western time zone. I was in Reno, Nevada. They're the AAA team for the Arizona Diamondbacks, an organization that actually has a familiar ownership group with the Simon family. They own the Pacers and the Fever here in town. Herb kind of took his assets out west and wanted to dabble with a minor league baseball and minor league soccer franchise out there. So he actually owns the Aces. He owns the soccer team that plays there and shares the stadium in downtown Reno. But I was out there for 2 years, a little different landscape. They've got a little more mountains out there, a little bit more of a desert feel. I frequented Lake Tahoe when I was out there, was able to work my way to the Pacific Ocean for the first time and see the coastline out there, enjoy the Bay Area as much as I could. But like I said, I always wanted to find myself back to the Midwest, and if I could, in Indianapolis is that landing spot.
What's the difference working in the PCL, working there as opposed to here?
The obvious one is that the games are much longer. Reno, as you know, you called the AAA game there, the AAA All-Star game there in 2013. It's a launching pad. So from what we're typically used to, a 240 to 2 hour and 50-minute game here in Indianapolis and in the International League for the most part, unless we're down in Charlotte, they're quicker games here in the International League, so I get to go to bed a little bit earlier than normal. In the PCL, you're working with different time zones. Indy is Eastern time, and every team in the IO is an Eastern time zone. You're dealing with 3 different time zones in the Pacific Coast League. You have teams that stretch as far as Tacoma, Washington, a suburb of Seattle, all the way down to Nashville, New Orleans, and Memphis. So teams that used to be in the association, that when it went to a 2-league format in AAA, a lot of them had to go one way or the other, and the PCL is obviously a 16-team league. But yeah, I would say just the length of the games is the number one thing. So that's not a bad thing that we play quicker games here in the IL.
Okay, well, that's changed a bit this year. But Cheyne, thank you so much. Congratulations on all you've achieved, and we appreciate all the great work.
No problem. Thank you very much, Howard. It's fun working with you.
It's our pleasure. That's Cheyne Reiter, the baseball communications manager of the Indianapolis Indians, on this, the home of the Indians, WHMB TV 40. Thanks to our guests, Gary Green, Dru Scott, Cheyne Reiter. See you next week on Inside the Indians.